Friday episode of the Dobbin Bandits, episode 251. And this episode is very, very special. To begin with, I am beyond pleased I was able to do this interview with my daughter, Lena. We have on today Jarrett Krosoczka, and he does a number of children's graphic novels, something called Lunch Lady. He's done Hey Kiddo, which is a really a wonderfully honest, personal graphic novel about his life, and one called Sunshine, which focuses on his summer working at the camp with children who had cancer. Lena brought the attention of what he's done, and we loved his books. We actually met him last week. He was so kind to Lena, to me, to spend time with us and sign some autographs. So this is a really special episode for me and for the Dobbin Bandits. Jarrett, thank you so much, and let's check it out. Jarrett Krosoczka. Sir, how are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Hi, Oren. Hi, Lena.
So the first question for you is, how did you first discover comics?
How did I first discover comics? Through the newspaper. Yeah, my love of comics began when I would grab the comics page of the newspaper and I would go to my favorite comic strips and then later collect the treasuries. And from there, it was, that 1989 Batman movie that sent me to the comic book store to get more into monthly comics.
Hmm.
And I was not a DC or Marvel person. I was very character specific. I was Batman, X-Men, Spider-Man, and and then from there, I got into graphic novels, I would say more in my college years.
Why did you want to become an author?
I just always loved making things up. I've always loved to draw, and all of my early artwork was very character based. I would invent my own characters. I'd make my own little comics. I'd make my own little stories. And there have been a few instances in which I've been illustrator only for a few projects. And that really taught me that I would probably identify as author before artist, even though visual art is everything to me. But in a way, I'm also writing through my art as well.
Who inspired you to write books for kids?
So what inspired me to write books for kids? When I was a kid myself, I loved making stories. And of course, those were for my fellow kids that I would share with my friends that I hung out with. Then when I was a senior in high school, I volunteered at a camp called Camp Sunshine, and this camp served kids that dealt with cancer and their families. And that experience, I think, was really the key point that made me think that I would write for a young audience. So I was 16, almost 17. I was a senior in high school, and that really cemented where I wanted to go with my stuff. I mean, uh, and also, aside from comics, most literature for young people has a lot of art in it, and so I studied illustration in college, and that's a big part of what I do.
So you mentioned Sunshine, which we have here, and also
Oh,
Hey Kiddo.
nice.
And these are books that are, it's stories about a part of your life. How do you, as an author, I guess, sort of edit yourself to put out, because it takes a lot of bravery to talk about your personal stories. How do you know what to put out there for everyone and what to keep for yourself as, memories that are just for you?
You know what? Well, I mean, one thing that I consider is this a real life event that is sort of centers on me, or is my story to tell? So, for instance, in Hey Kiddo, there were other things that happened in the family that was probably more like an aunt's story to tell or an uncle's story to tell. Um, and so I really wanted to center what I shared with, the events that had ramifications on my upbringing. And so it does take a lot of courage. It takes a lot of mental energy to tell your story. Um, anyone who's featured in any of my books, I get their permission before I publish it, whether they want their actual name or likeness. So for instance, Sunshine, I'm still very much in touch with a lot of the families. For the families that I'm not in touch with, I change names, change likenesses.
Now, when you do a book like this, you know, because kids that are very smart, so you don't want to go either way over their heads, but you don't want to dumb it down and insult them. How do you find a good balance that it reaches them with your stories?
Well, Hey Kiddo and Sunshine, those are young adult books. So those are written for readers 12 and older. So I don't think about anything being too difficult or challenging for them to grapple with.
Mhm.
And so I'm just a straight shooter when it comes to those books. For my younger material, like for Lunch Lady, those books are meant to be campy and fun and very lighthearted.
Mhm. And how do you choose the right topics for the books? When you look back at, events in your life, how do you say, this might be a good way or a good story for to share with others?
Well, I mean, Hey Kiddo was a story that sort of percolated in the back of my mind for years and years and years. I mean, that was sort of the thrust of my life is being raised by my grandparents and dealing with my mother's addictions to drugs. And so it was writing that book that I learned that, you know, I'm a multitude of things. Like all of us as individuals are complicated. We're not just any one thing. And so there was a chapter in Hey Kiddo that was about my time working at Camp Sunshine. But that chapter just became very unruly. It was like this 100-page chapter. It had nothing really to do with the main thrust of the story being told in Hey Kiddo. So my editor said, well, let's take this chapter about Camp Sunshine out. And should you want to write more memoir, then this would be the second book. And so with that now, I have a lot of other ideas of things that happened to me and whether those events happened over a week, a day, or multiple years that I would like to also write. And so just like any story, whether it's a memoir or a piece of nonfiction, ideas grow and fester within me until they have to explode out onto the page. For me, writing is just like an innate need versus a goal.
Did you find writing Hey Kiddo difficult to look back on certain things, or did it sort of help you sort of either find closure or move along with certain things?
I mean, certainly both. It was incredibly difficult to relive some of those more complicated memories and unearthing some of those memories that had been buried. Uh, you know, in one way or another, like it would have been emotionally easier in my life just to have never have written it. But there was a lot of catharsis in writing it, and the biggest takeaway that I got is that when I openly shared my story very publicly, my story no longer owned me. I now owned my story. So there was a lot of power in that.
No, I know because you told me about it, and I went through the book too, and how much it affected her reading your story. When that book comes out, is there a sense of nervousness right before, it's about to be on the shelves? Like, okay, I just put all this out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you
Yeah.
handle that? And when did you start to say, okay, what I'm doing is affecting people?
The greatest anxiety I had in the whole process was like the 4 months prior to publication, because Hey Kiddo was so vastly different from my other body of work. So there was this one piece of anxiety that was, um, this could prove shocking for the people who know me for Lunch Lady or Jedi Academy or my picture books. And then there's this other piece of anxiety of like, I'm really sharing some intimate details that I've rarely shared in small groups of friends, let alone so very publicly. But we're a little over 5 years after the publication of that book, and um, it's been so gratifying and empowering year after year to hear from people who have either seen their experiences reflected, it helped them understand their plight better, or also it helped maybe young readers or adult readers who had more of like your traditional Cleaver family, Leave It to Beaver upbringing, to help them understand what some of their peers have gone through, or for teachers what some of their students might be dealing with at home.
Let's talk some more about some of the other books you worked on, but I'm just curious, could Hey Kiddo or Sunshine been book one of your journey, or did you have to do these other books in order to find your footing as a writer and then say, you know what, now I want to do this?
You know what, I started thinking about Hey Kiddo very early on in my career. I mean, when my first book was published, I started thinking about it. And I'm glad that I didn't write Hey Kiddo early in my career. One, because I was that much younger. So like I was in my early 20s and everything was still very black and white for me, heroes versus villains. I needed to mature and grow more and understand a bit more of my mother's plight of addiction. But also all of those other picture books and all of those other graphic novels, sort of served as a master's class for me to truly understand how to bring words and pictures together to communicate a story. And, whereas I thought that, Hey Kiddo could really complicate the greater career, I think it's having been known for Lunch Lady and the younger skewing stuff maybe made Hey Kiddo a bit more powerful because they didn't realize somebody that they had been reading all along had dealt with these very heavy issues.
How long on average does it usually take for you to write one of your books?
Oh, anywhere between like 5 months or 20 years. It just depends on the book. I mean, Hey Kiddo really wandered, in and out of my consciousness for about 16 years before I got the contract to write the book. And then there are times when I have a concept for a book and I'll know just right away what to do with those ideas. But once you receive a contract from a publisher, the process is typically like a year or two to get that all together.
Now, for Hey Kiddo, you did the art for that as well too, didn't you?
Yes, I've done all of the art for all of the books that I've written. Yes.
So how do you balance the time between writing and getting the art together?
Well, by the time I'm getting the art together, the writing is done, right?
Gotcha.
So I write everything out as a script, and we make sure that script is polished and in great shape before I start sketching. And then when I'm sketching everything, I'm translating the script to the visuals, and then we go over that sketch uh, to really make sure that things are reading visually.
I'm just curious because when you're going over that second time for the art, do you ever look at it and it's like, you know what, maybe I want to add something to this scene that I didn't write, or maybe I want to take away from the scene that I didn't write, that you have to sort of self-edit a little bit?
Um, you mean when I'm going from sketch to final?
Yeah.
When I'm going to sketch to final, not necessarily, because a lot of that critical thinking is done on the sketch stage.
Mhm.
The sketch stage, what I might say is I might cut back on some of the language I'm using. Like I might not need so many words to communicate what I'm trying to say. Um, and when it gets to the final art stage, any kind of pulling at the thread could really unravel the sweater. So if I wanted to change a plot line or something, I'd have to be really confident in it because everything is designed such that I know what's going to be revealed every time we turn the page. So, I could never add just one singular page. If I was adding something in, I'd have to add 2 pages. Or if I couldn't just take away one page, I'd have to take away 2 pages in order for everything to flow thereafter.
Right. So moving to being part of one of the biggest universes in the world, Star Wars, part of sort of American mythology, you do Jedi Academy. Um, how did you get involved with that?
I was invited by the editor of the Jedi Academy books. Um, Jeffrey Brown, he created the first 3 volumes in the series, and they were looking for somebody to continue on and write some more adventures. And that particular editor's nephew was a big Lunch Lady fan, and so he was visiting his sister, and he saw the Lunch Lady books there on the coffee table, and they reached out, and I was invited to create a new cast of characters and create a new set of adventures. And yeah, it was they just messaged me out of the blue. It was totally took me off guard.
Now, were you a Star Wars guy?
Yeah, I didn't grow up with Star Wars. I was born the first year the first movie was released, and I was too young for Empire Strikes Back. And by the time Return of the Jedi was released to theaters, I had already been taken to ET in the movie theaters and left in tears because I was so afraid by the aliens and the special effects. So I completely missed the original theatrical run of all the movies. And back then, if you didn't see it in the movie theater, you just didn't see it, right? So I had a few friends who had the toys. Um, And when I was a freshman in college, my friend Sean Cook uh, was just horrified that I hadn't seen them yet. And he sat me down and we watched. He had like the special letterbox editions that had been recently released on VHS. And then I was hooked and I read a bunch of the comics and I even named one of the faculty members after my friend Sean as well.
Just like to add that I was also removed from the theater for ET for crying hysterically. So I think there's, a generation of us who had to be brought
It
out,
was
ruin everyone else's experience in the movie.
That's right. Yeah, I vividly remember being taken out, my family being really annoyed by me, but I was just in tears. I guess also like, I mean, I guess a difference in upbringing, we weren't as exposed to such advanced special effects everywhere. So there was something so grotesque about even just the design of ET as a kid that I was just horrified. I was just terrified by it.
So being part of Star Wars, are there certain parameters put on you as a writer as because there is so much that goes into Star Wars and history and stuff like that. Do they put certain parameters on you to stay within certain context of previous stories, or did you sort of have free reign as to create as you like?
I mean, a bit of free reign because the Jedi Academy books are not canon. But I can't contradict anything that's canon. So, there's, one appointed person at Lucasfilm who reads all of the scripts, all of the books to make sure that nothing is contradicting one another. And so, right, I mean, I've seen all of the movies, but I haven't read all of the books and all of the literature that's been published over the years. So if there was anything that I wrote about that contradicted something that was canon, they would point it out to me. But truly, like, I mean, I was asked to, create my own adventures. They didn't say these books need to be about XYZ and these plot points. The Jedi Academy books are they're about kids who are growing up and they happen to have they happen to be able to wield the force. So when I was writing those books, I would write with kid problems as the lead, and then layer in the Jedi problems on top of that.
How does it feel to be part? I mean, you say it's not canon, but in the fans' hearts who've read the book, for these young people growing up, your stories and your characters are part of their Star Wars experience going forward. How does it feel
Yeah,
that you're part of the Star Wars world?
that's pretty wild, because time is of course weird because of the pandemic, but we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of when my first Jedi Academy book published. So I'm now meeting a lot of young adults, teenagers who said that they grew up with the Jedi Academy books, and definitely in the era that I was making those books, um, the director of publishing at Lucasfilm told me that like he'd be hear from a lot of people that these books were like the gateway to Star Wars for those kids who didn't know it. And that's kind of who I was writing those for. I mean, because I was a kid who didn't know the world when I was young, when I was a kid, I wanted any kid who had never seen one of the movies to be able to pick up the book and follow it. But still, if you've loved the characters, if you love the world, there's plenty there that you're going to latch onto and be amused by.
Do you prefer as a writer? I mean, it's sort of two different things because with Star Wars, it's somebody else's created universe, their ideas of a Jedi and stuff like that. And you got to play with it and do that, or creating your own, stories, your own visions, and having that sort of freedom.
I mean, I went into Jedi Academy books thinking it would be more difficult because I'm thinking, there are more cooks in the kitchen. And it was quite the opposite. I mean, it's way easier to walk into someone else's intellectual property and write for it. It's way more difficult to create your own worlds. Way more difficult. And uh, I've written for Jedi Academy. I've written short stories for Star Wars, anthologies. I've written for the Snoopy show on Apple TV. I've written for some other characters that I can't disclose just yet. And you have this feeling of like, I can't believe I get to use this character. I can't believe I get to play around in this world. And it's honestly, I find it so much easier. I find it so much more stressful to create your own worlds.
So I just want to jump on for a second. You just said you did some stuff for the Snoopy show on Apple TV. Was that writing scripts or plots for the episode?
Both. So I was in the writer's room for a season, and some of the ideas I put forward, got chosen to be an episode, but they could maybe get assigned to another specific writer. I was given a specific storyline to write that was based on an idea that I pitched.
Gotcha.
How does it feel knowing that kids all around the world are excited to read the books you've made?
Well, I mean, I don't think about it too much because I think that might drive me mad, right? I mean, I've got my everyday life that I have to tend to. I have 3 kids who are aged 15, 12, and 7. And so that's really, my universe and my world is being a dad and uh, having time with my family and time with my wife. And I have 3 dogs who are constantly having accidents in the house. So, when you're on your hands and knees picking up puddles of pee and poop in your house, you don't really think about, oh, like kids all over the world are reading my books. Like that's, when I visit schools though, when I visit schools as a visiting author, that's a wonderful feeling that the kids have known the books and they've read them and when I get to have those in-person interactions.
Because you are right in a field right now with the young adult graphic novels that it's taking off. I mean, Scholastic is outselling Marvel and DC,
Yeah.
by a long shot. Why do you think it is that these books are becoming so beloved and so sought after for a younger audience?
I think because they're creator driven. They're creator driven. They're available at the school library. They're available at the bookshops that are not comic shops. I mean, I remember for years, like the Lunch Lady books were very popular, and they were in every independent bookstore in the country. They were in every school library in the country and public library in the country. I had people dressing up as a Lunch Lady character every Halloween, but then my local comic book store didn't have them. And then I went in once and mentioning it, and they said, well, here's the card for the person who buys the books. For you can certainly pitch them to. And so I think because those books made it into a different market than your traditional comic book, which is for the most part, just in a comic book store. I see that sort of leveling off now. I see comic book shops across the board in not just having like the monthly superheroes, but having a section for young readers that are graphic novels. And the more the merrier, the more places a kid can discover a comic, the better off we'll all be, I think.
And you're also seeing as well that, there are superhero comics, but comics in general and graphic novels in general are opening up so wide to any kind of story. It doesn't have to be superheroes. It
Yeah.
could be just about anything, and it's something that anybody can relate to. Like they say now, everyone has their own comic out there because there is so much of, a diversity among the books.
Yeah, no, I mean it's amazing. I mean, growing up, I wouldn't have thought I would have been able to have this career because I would have figured I would have to go work for a company and either write for someone else's character or create a character that then the rights would then be given up to that particular company. Which is why I led with picture books. I mean, that's why I went to the direction. That's why I launched with picture books because I wanted to own my characters. I wanted to be the author and illustrator, and I pitched Lunch Lady to my publisher Random House at a time in which there still weren't graphic novels being published. So I think it was 2005 when I first pitched Lunch Lady, and what's interesting is that just a whole bunch of us of just about the same generation, who grew up in different parts of the country, who grew up with Garfield, who grew up with Batman, um, we all somehow uh, just all pitched our publishers our ideas. I kind of liken it to the Muppet movie where Fozzie and Kermit are just riding along and they start picking up these lovable weirdos as you go along. I mean, that's my crew of cartoonists who debuted throughout the early the mid to late 2000s.
How do you think us as parents, because we're both parents, how do we compete with the iPads and stuff to keep kids wanting to read going forward as adults?
I mean, for my kids are all have devices, and certainly I think the pandemic really just opened the Pandora's box open wide of the amount of screen time they all get. But from my son who's 7, I just heard him walk in the front door. I have limits on apps that are consumption-based apps, but apps that are creative apps, like there's no time limit. So he's learned how to animate and how to draw, how to write stories. So it can be a great tool if used wisely. And what's remarkable is 3 for 3 of my kids all prefer print over ebooks. So we keep books in every room of the house. We make sure that they're accessible. We make sure we are exposing them to the library, and that there's always the option of the book, especially when that time limit goes off and your iPad suddenly becomes unusable.
Can you see yourself doing traditional comics at all, like starting your own independent comic, or if one of the companies wanted to have you do a run on certain books, could you see yourself moving in that direction, or do you like where you are right now?
I don't know that I would create my own independent publisher, but I would be psyched to do it like a little run, like on on a character for one of like Marvel or DC or something. I'd love to be the author of that. I don't know if I'd want to draw the pictures for them. Um, but I would definitely love to write. I would be totally open to that.
All right, so who would you write? Who would you if you had to pick? This came.
Well, Batman, X-Men, Spider-Man, those are my go-tos. So, if there's an opportunity to write for one of those characters or worlds, I'd be psyched.
Just one follow-up, because we talked to a lot of folks. We talked to younger writers, and we talked to older writers too. And the older writers, they sort of liked the 1, 2, 3 year runs on a book, knowing they'd be on for a while. And it seems like nowadays it's sort of writers would prefer maybe 5, 6 issues, sort of like a graphic novel story, then move on to a different book. As a writer, what would you have preferred to do?
I don't think there's a binary answer for that. It depends on what the character is and what kind of story I might want to share.
Makes sense.
What advice do you have for people who want to get into writing?
You just have to write. You just have to write and write some really bad stories and write some really terrible first drafts, and just knowing that the only thing a first draft needs to be is done. So you just write it. Don't even correct your spelling as you go, as you're writing that first draft. Like put your horse blinders on and just race forward. Um, and that whatever project you have that you've made, the point of creating that piece of art or writing that story isn't to make the perfect thing, but to learn from that experience so that the next piece that you create is better. And then the third piece will be stronger because you've had this experience, and so on and so forth. And that all compounds for the duration of your career and your life.
How do you see, or how would one stand out now in the graphic novel field? How do you make yourself, there's a lot of books out there, and how have you found to make yourself stand out in a crowded field?
I mean, you just have to be yourself. I mean, I think that when especially it kind of goes when people ask me if I'm afraid of artificial intelligence taking over my job, and it's like no one could be me, just like no one could be you, and everyone has such a unique point of view and experience as they walk through this earth, that if you put yourself into your work, it's going to be so uniquely you that people will gravitate towards it.
Now, do you
You'll
also,
find you'll find your audience.
I was going to say, because you said before, school libraries have your books in there, and as far as bookstores as well. How it's more of a business question, but do you and Scholastic work together as a plan of attack to see what's the best place to put your books, or do they just sort of handle that themselves?
Scholastic has like a massive distribution, right? So, they have their sales channels, and I certainly do a lot of promotion for a book before it publishes and right after it publishes with Scholastic. But other than that, I and your authors, like we're on our own. So, um, I've always visited a lot of schools. I mean, that's a big part of my business, where schools invite me in, and I go across the country, and I the first year that Lunch Lady published, I probably had 120 schools, libraries, bookstores, conferences that I attended. So a lot of the success that I've been able to achieve is because, I've been a traveling encyclopedia salesman, right? Like you have to hit the road, like you have to get out there, you have to get in front of your audiences. Um, you have to make that success happen. And, now I also create a lot of video content. And it's not that my publisher is asking me to make video content. If in fact, it's probably the opposite of like maybe make less video content and actually finish your books on time, Jarrett. But um, I really value my ability to connect with my audiences through video, through social posts, and then also through, these presentations that I deliver in person.
I was gonna say, if you just talk a little bit, because you just brought it up about the hustle that goes into it, because it's not just like your book comes out and it's a success automatically. You
No.
have to get out there. You have to talk to people and make people aware that these are out here. I mean, it's a lot of time on the road. It's probably a lot of airline miles, and
Yes.
people to talk to. How do you keep the energy up, and how does it not wear you down?
Well, I mean, certainly the pandemic disrupted everything, right? So, um, it was really hard to contend with losing that part of my business. And 4 years after the pandemic started, my speaking business is just finally back up to the speed it was in spring of 2019, right? So before COVID hit. And I make royalties off my books, and I get, advances from the publisher when I finish certain benchmarks. But, all of that is very unpredictable. Giving lectures is a very predictable income source for me and for so many authors. So there's this deeper appreciation I have for it now, and being able to get in front of those audiences. Um, but certainly, like last week, I had 4 days in which I was at events. They were all local, so I didn't have to sleep away from the family, but I did log about 19 hours in the car getting to and from these events. And, that's exhausting. And it's certainly, as one ages, your stamina lowers with being able to keep up with all of that. So, right now I'm playing a little bit of catch up, but it always is about like finding that right balance, that work-life balance. And for me, I guess not just work-life balance, but like the balance of life and work where I'm on the road and work where I need to be at my desk and writing and drawing, because those two things can't have those two kinds of work can't happen at the exact same time. And if I'm on the road a lot, I have to accommodate, I have to plan for the fact that I'll probably need like a day of just recovery, because I get home and those three kids are at three different schools and they have to get to school the next morning. So, uh, uh, but, it's all a learning process, and you just learn to roll with the punches, because just like when I became a parent, well, suddenly life was very different. Um, in 4 years time, my life will be very different again, because my eldest will be off to college. So that'll be a whole other set of circumstances that I'll be contending with. So, um, I'm just enjoying the ride. And like any human being, some days you're like, I just need to get to bedtime. I just need to get to bedtime. And then I'll wake up, we'll do it all over again tomorrow.
You mentioned your kids. Do your kids think your books are cool?
They do. They wanted, I mean, they admit it, but then they don't, right? So like, I mean, I'm a dad, so like they roast me all the time.
Mhm.
Um, and it's interesting. I think every time my kids have gone from small community preschools to like the bigger elementary, then the bigger middle school and the bigger high school. That's when I think when they connect to dots of like, oh, like dad's work is out there, you know. Um, and like my eldest, who when she got to middle school met people who halfway through the year, one of her friends was like, she came over to hang out and she like just didn't understand why we had so many copies of Hey Kiddo. Like you guys just must really like that book. And Zoe's like, well, my dad wrote that book. That's why. And they're like, oh, like I didn't make the connection between your last name and because Hey Kiddo is a memoir, she came home one day and she's like, oh, so and so really likes your taste in music. And I was like, how does that kid know what music I listen to? And she's like, well, you wrote about it in the book. I was like, oh, right. Because there are scenes where like Weezer or Smashing Pumpkins is playing in the background. Um, So it's just funny. But at the end of the day, it's like a person whose dad is a dentist. That's just what their dad does.
I just also very curious with you. Are there or almost like evolutionary points in books that you can look back on and see yourself evolving as a writer to where you are now?
Oh, for sure. Not only evolving, but like books that served as like benchmarks of like, oh, like, okay, this book will take my career to a level I hadn't been to before. So, um, I had my debut picture book, but then 4 years later, a picture book called Punk Farm. That was my biggest picture book. And then 4 years after that, Lunch Lady debuted. And then another 4 or 5 years after that, Jedi Academy came out, and that was a big deal. And then was it 3 years after Jedi Academy published Hey Kiddo was released. So when I look back, I see those benchmarks of books that really sort of move the needle in the bigger sense of the career, which I think also corresponds to growing as an author, as an artist. I never wanted to be just one thing. Didn't want to just have one character that I only did that one character for every book my whole life. I always have been working on evolving and changing.
When did you find the confidence to say, I made the right decision to become a writer?
I'll let you know.
I was going to say,
But here's the thing. Here's the epiphany I came to. So I've been in this business for 23 years now. And, my closest friends and confidants have also been in the business for 23, 25, 26 years. And we all came recently talked about how we're surprised by how much hustle is still involved in what we do and how we're still not confident in our work. But I came to the realization that like, I was like, well, the only authors and artists I know who are very confident in their work are also kind of jerks. Like, so that's a good place to be, not being confident, not being fully confident in your work.
do you think confidence also could breed complacency as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I think success can breed complacency as well. Um, confidence and success could certainly, you always need to have some kind of carrot to dangle in front of you to keep you moving.
With you, something mentioned before about owning the characters that you've done. I mean, with Lunch Lady, with Sunshine, with Hey Kiddo, I mean, they're not characters as a Batman or something like that, but these are people, and these are things, stories you created. How important to you as a writer to be able to hold on to what you created, that it doesn't become part of something a bigger corporate, engine.
Well, I mean, the intellectual property is the most valuable asset that I have in my life. And, um, certainly there may someday be a TV show or movie or something. I've had 10 various options over the years, but whenever if ever something were to ever make it to green light, that company is buying the film rights to the character, but I will forever have the book rights to the character, and, hopefully I live a good long life. And then when I die, I think it's 80 years after that, the copyright is alive, that my kids will, have to tend to, and work, either hire somebody to deal with those rights, or they'll have to deal with it themselves if they want to benefit from it, I guess. But um and I was offered during the pandemic a deal of this company that wanted to just buy up all my intellectual property. And it was a little tempting at the time, right? Because everything was shut down and I wasn't visiting schools. But while that money would have helped then, I ultimately realized, like, I think these will be worth more in like 30 years.
Right. And it's just fascinating what you said, because from what you said, you've had conversations about taking what you've written and putting it to the next, form of media, whether it be a movie, a television show, or something like that. Is there a nervousness as to, okay, here's this, they might interpret it, what you wrote, a different way, or present it a different way from what you had in mind? Is there any nervousness about giving that over or being part of something like that?
Depends on the book. I mean, I walked away from an offer for Hey Kiddo because I just didn't like what they had to say. And um, having had that experience of having projects option, the only time that you have any power as the author is up until the point you sign that contract. So, I mean, it's very much like Ariel signing that contract for Ursula, and like you would lose that part of your voice because you're not in charge. The only person in charge is whoever's paying for the production. Like that's the person who's ultimately going to make the decisions. So I'd love to raise the funds to independently adapt Hey Kiddo for film. For a character like Lunch Lady, well, I would just have to really trust the people that I'm working with, because if that were to be animated or live action, I mean, that budget would be beyond what I could come up with to make independently. I mean, I think Hey Kiddo, it would still be it would be a lot of money to make, but still like it would be very minuscule compared to what the Hollywood budget would be.
So what projects are you working on now?
I'm working on new Lunch Lady books. I have 2 more Lunch Lady books written. I'm working on the art. I have a new series that I'm working on that is for younger readers. I can't tell you much about it, and I have more concepts for young adult, more memoir, and perhaps some pieces of fiction as well. And I love telling stories visually. So you know, whether that's for little kids, elementary kids or teens or adults. I mean, if I continue to write memoir, eventually they won't be young adult anymore, because that kid is only going to grow up, right? So so we'll see what's before me.
I don't know if you saw, but when he mentioned doing a new memoir, she used to get a little fist pump like that. So
Nice.
that's one book sold right there.
Nice.
Are you working any shows, any cons over the summer, or just working on these projects?
I am going on a little self-created book tour of public libraries in the Northeast. So I have, I think, 11 or 12 public libraries that I'll be doing cartooning workshops for, all within driving distance of my home. I don't believe I'll be at any shows. I mean, since I don't have a new book coming out, I don't have some of my publishers saying you need to get to this con or this con. So it's kind of a nice place to be, to not have a brand new book out, but still be able to get out there and meet with my audience.
How can folks follow you? How can folks learn about what's going on, see what you've been up to?
So my website is studiojjk.com, and across social media, I can be found at studiojjk.
Well, as a parent, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, but thank you for all the wonderful works you've done, the stories that you've put for not for my daughter, but for children all over, and your honesty in these books, because like we said, it takes courage to put yourself out there and to tell these stories. And I really salute you for it. And I'd love to have you back on and talk some more about some new projects.
I appreciate that. And yeah, just say the word. I'll be back for sure. Thanks for having me.
And we are back. Yeah, I got to do an interview with my daughter, so that's really cool. One might be coming up soon with my son. We'll have to see. Jarrett is what you saw there of how kind he is. That's how he is in person. I mean, he's the real deal. They did a full reading of that book, Sunshine, when we went, and it was absolutely amazing. I hadn't read the whole thing before, but to hear it perform live, it's great. I know he has a lot more coming out soon. Guy's also done Star Wars. So, yeah, he's done a lot of wonderful things. And we hope to have him back to talk about more about what he's doing. And I know Lena's still on cloud nine about this. So, a wonderful episode. Thank you, Jarrett. Thank you guys for listening. Remember, rate, review, subscribe, and we will see you soon.